Chapter 3. Thousands of waterways connected the cities of Reino del Sol. Wide rivers allowed for large cargo and transport ships to ferry goods and people between communities, while smaller canals provided local drainage, irrigation, and water supply. Even with access to cars and public transport, boat travel was still the only way to reach Sol Temple. The Quetzalcoatl entourage of Tio and the priests was small enough to fit in only one trajinera, a flat-bottomed boat about 25 feet long and 6 feet wide. It was made of wood and painted with intricate designs in Quetzalcoatl's distinctive vibrant colors, with a curved roof that would protect them from the blistering sun and errant downpours as they traveled through the microclimates of Reino del Sol. A priest on the back of the boat pushed against the eroded slate bottoms of Quetzalcoatl's canals with a long pole. Since Quetzalcoatl was located on the western edge of Sol, their journey inland allowed the Rio Agua cut through other jade cities. Save for some of Quetzalcoatl's neighbors, Tio had seen little of Reino del Sol. For years, he had only caught glimpses in this pilgrimage to the sun god's island. There was Mazatlan, with its meticulous patchwork quilt of farms and orchards. The Mazatlan temple towered in the distance. Dark vines dotted with crimson tomatoes and chili peppers of all shapes and sizes glinted like jewels. They went through Medicali next, with its tall glass buildings, where Diosa Medica's temple served as a teaching hospital. The only gold city that crossed was the lavish Puerto Cascadas. The canals were wide and filled with large boats and water mills that were used as renewable energy sources. Diosa Agua's temple, difficult to glimpse among the shiny glass skyscrapers, was made of slick stone covered in moss, with waterfalls cascading down every side. The waterway opened up and dozens of trajineras spread out before them in the massive lake set in the heart of Reino del Sol. Crowds gathered on white, cable-stayed bridges that looked downright futuristic compared to the stone arches they had in Quetzalcoatl. Cheers swelled as each patron's children passed by, dipping significantly when the tiny Quetzalcoatl and Trajinera followed suit. Sol Temple was on an island in the lake, surrounded by an unnatural ring of jagged mountains that acted as a wall. The highest point in all of Sol, the temple was easily three times the size of Quetzalcoatl's and made entirely of gold. The Sol Stone was housed in the open-air observatory at the top, giving off a powerful ray of light. Their progress slowed as trajineras crowded together, lining up at one of the many waterfalls cascading down the mountains. "Any chance I can fake sick and skip the opening ceremony?" Tio asked, dread sinking into his stomach as the mountains towered before them. Humac considered Tio for a moment, just long enough for him to get his hopes up. What he didn't expect him to say was, "Nia will be fine, Tio. Don't have to worry about her." Tio blinked. Was Humac a mind reader now? Each gold semidiose had a specialization of their godly parents' powers that they harnessed while training at the academy. As the semidiosa of the earth god, Nia could manipulate metal and rock with nothing more than a thought. She was also obscenely strong, even by gold standards. "I'm not worried about her," he lied, quickly trying to recover. Humac looked like he didn't believe him, but at least had the decency not to say it. "No, you cannot skip the ceremony." Tio huffed, blowing his drooping circlet higher on his forehead. "Worth a shot." Finally, it was their turn. Even though he'd gone through the enchanted barrier to Sol Temple hundreds of times before, it still took his breath away. Right before the front of the boat was doused, the thunderous waterfall slowly split open just wide enough for them to pass through. When he was little, Tio liked to shout and hear his voice echo, but he hadn't done that since a particularly messy bat incident after which Humac grounded him for a week. Once they made it through, the island came into full view. Sol Temple was ancient, never having been renovated or industrialized like the outside cities, but still pristine. The Golden Temple was covered in intricate carvings of the sun, planets, and various constellations. When it was time to disembark, the priests, in their clean white robes embroidered with the sun glyph of Sol, came on board to help them unload and to take their things to their housing for the night. They filed down the main road, merging with the large crowd. As Tio craned his head in search of Nia, Humac kept catching his cape and dragging him back in line. More priests greeted them as they approached the courtyard. Through the doors of the temple, a grand staircase led down into the main hall. A large statue stood in the center, a huge golden sun with constellations etched into its smooth surface. Crowds of semidioses and temple priests gathered around standing tables, a sea of colorful robes and outfits. Laughter, music, and the smell of food floated through the air. As people milled around chatting, Dios Mariachi's children performed at the base of the steps. Half were dressed in black suits and matching wide-brimmed hats, stomping their boots in heavy, percussive steps. The other half danced and waved their ruffled skirts like colorful trompos spinning in circles. Small flashes of lightning danced in Dios Tormentos's curly gray hair and beard as he laughed at something Dio Mariachi said. Surrounded by jades and golds, Tio felt like he'd been shoved in a cage. Jade semidioses sequestered in their own cities and didn't mingle much. Without Nia, the humiliating truth was that Tio didn't have any other friends to search out, so he stuck to Humac's side. Meanwhile, it was like the golds were all in a secret club, flocking to one another in packs. Nia had told him how the highest-ranked gold semidioses were their own clique, never associating with the lower-ranked students. Even now, Tio watched Xochi, the daughter of Primavera, and Otzi, the daughter of Tormentoso, pass by, laughing with their arms linked. Both wore exquisite dresses. Xochi's black off-the-shoulder outfit had rows of flanges made entirely of real flowers, while Otzi's light blue ensemble featured a high-collared ruffled skirt trimmed with silver ribbons that formed a star around her hips when she spread the hem apart. Her box braids were adorned with silver string, gold cuffs, and tiny seats that mimicked the sound of falling rain when she moved. Everyone seemed to have their own circles and hierarchies, and Tio was squarely outside them. Well, almost. Suddenly, the scent of sweet apples, copal incense, and musk tickled Tio's nose. It was subtle enough that the average person probably wouldn't have noticed, but Tio had been expecting it. He turned and took a moment to spot the figure, dressed in black, waiting in the shadows. "Phantasma," he said with a wide smile. The Diosa looked like a young girl, maybe a couple of years younger than Tio, though age, of course, meant nothing to a god. As she stepped closer, light sparked in the golden embroidered stars and suns on her robes and lace mantle. Her butterfly companions rested on her clothes like tawny orange brooches. One sat at her temple, holding back her dark wavy hair and showing off the bright marigold plumes that hung from her ears. Phantasma was a jade goddess who served Mariette, the gold goddess of death. Mariette's power was second only to that of Sol, two sides of the same coin, the giver of life and the taker. While Mariette was the harbinger of death, Phantasma was the gentle caretaker of the dead. As Tio approached, the petite goddess lifted a hand in greeting with a hesitant smile. "I've got something for you," Tio said, dragging his hand into the tight pocket of his pants. Phantasma's eyebrows lifted and she leaned forward. Tio pulled out a strawberry cream chupa chup. "It's your favorite!" A wide smile brightened the goddess's face. Her cold fingers brushed against Tio's as she took the lollipop and gently cradled it in her hands like it was a tiny bird. Her gray eyes, the color of stone after rain, drank in the pink and white wrapper. Tio grinned. Even though he could never get Phantasma to laugh, he was proud of the many smiles he'd collected. When Tio was little, he found Phantasma sitting at the base of the sun statue in the Soul Temple courtyard. Thinking she was lonely and in need of a friend, Tio gave Phantasma a chupa chup he had in his pocket. She looked a little confused but smiled and accepted his offering. In return, a skeleton hand popped out from the ground between them, which admittedly should have been terrifying, but held between its bony fingers was the most perfectly round and vibrant marigold Tio had ever laid eyes on. The two had fallen into a ritual of gift-giving ever since. While Tio always gave Phantasma a chupa chup, Phantasma's gifts were more of a surprise. A skeletal hand popped right through the stone floor, presenting Tio with a mouse skull. Tio took the tiniest skull and smiled. "Thanks," he said, now left with the problem of figuring out where to put it. "There you are!" Tio heard his mom's happy, sing-song voice a second before she swept him into a hug, as if she hadn't seen him a few hours ago. "And Phantasma!" Quetzal added with a warm smile. Phantasma meekly waved, the chupa chup in the iron grip of her free hand. Tio was about to ask his mom if she'd seen Nia yet when his ears began to ring. At the same time, the palm of his left hand started to itch, which only meant one thing. "Tio and Quetzal, two of my favorite people," came the booming voice of Dio Malasuete. Tio immediately bit his tongue and stuffed his hand into his pocket to stave off any bad luck before forcing a smile. He knew better than to go against the old superstitions in the presence of Malasuete. Priests and semidioses alike quickly stepped out of the jade god's way, muttering prayers under their breath. Tall and thin as a rail, the god of bad luck wore black slacks and a matching guirobero with round eye stitch and purple thread running down either side. His hair was oily black and always slicked back out of his face. Tio thought his grin showed too many teeth and never seemed to reach his eyes. The really unsettling part of his ensemble was the strings of teeth he wore around his neck and wrists. "Always so good to see you, and how tall you've gotten!" Dios Malasuerte chuckled, thumping the back of Tio's shoulder. "They must be feeding you well in Quetzalin. You look so much like your beautiful mother." Tio did his best to smile, tongue still pressed between his teeth. Malasuerte was like a weird, annoying uncle, but Tio knew better than to risk insulting him. "Are you enjoying your night?" Quetzal asked, taking over the conversation. "Very much so," Malasuerte said. "It's always nice to get quality time with the kids." The kids consisted of a large group of semidioses following the god. Some were older, in what Tio guessed was their early 30s, the youngest a toddler in the arms of a teenage girl. They were a rambunctious group of about 10, but they moved so much, laughing, shoving, and teasing one another, that it's hard to keep track. There was one boy Teal recognized, however, who stood behind his dad, anxiously looking around the temple. Zio was 13, which Teal only knew because he recently attended Zio's gender confirmation ceremony. Donnie and Renata are eligible this time, as is Zio, Mala Suerte said. Zio seemed to hate being the center of attention, shifting awkwardly and wringing his hands. Mala Suerte placed his large hand on top of Zio's head. Unlike his sibling's sleek black hair, Zio had a curly mop that fell into his eyes. My little troublemaker, Mala Suerte said affectionately. Tio felt bad for Zio. He clearly didn't want to be here, and Tio could relate. Since the itching had faded, it was safe to finally speak. Hey, he said, giving the younger boy a nod. Zio returned it with a tight-lipped smile, fidgeting with his father's eye glyph that hung around his neck on layered strings of teeth. Tio didn't want to know where they came from. I suppose the shades are just here as a formality, Mala Suerte said, scratching his stubble with black-painted fingernails. Not necessarily a bad thing, Quetzal said with a tired smile. Mala Suerte flashed another toothy grin. I would have to agree. Sorry to interrupt. Everyone turned to see that Verdad had joined them. I'm writing a piece on the Lumbury twins, Verdad said, notebook and pen poised at the ready. She had short hair, longer on the top and always swept across her forehead, and a monotone voice that Tio found difficult to pay attention to. Tio, I was wondering if I'd ask you a couple of questions about the fire in Quetzal earlier today. There was literally nothing Tio would like to talk about less. There was a fire, and they put it out, he said in a non-exactly friendly tone. A small crease formed behind Verdad's eyebrows. She was dressed in a pinstripe suit that perfectly reflected her brand of no-nonsense investigative journalism. I've never been able to interview a semidiosa survivor of rescue like this, she said, tapping her pen. I'd love to hear about what it was like to be saved by your peers. They're not my peers. Verdad glanced up. Why do you say that? It took concentrated effort to keep his tone even. Ask the Academy. Told you he'd be useless. Trisme approached the group, high-heeled shoes clicking across the stone floor, and his photographers not far behind. The only thing more alarming than being the focus of Trisme's attention was his plastic, red-tinted smile. Trisme and Verdad were the adult children of Dios's communion, and while they both served as Reino del Sol's leading journalists, they had very different approaches to the craft. Trisme was the tabloid mogul known for getting the inside scoop before anyone else, while Verdad preferred heavy-hitting reporting that focused on politics and current events. A bright flash burned Teal's eyes, making him flinch and throw his arms up in defense. Don't waste the film, Trisme scolded before turning to Teal. How's about something more interesting? Do you think your friend Nia has what it takes to make it into the trials? Don't give this viper a sound bite, Mala Suerte growled, his lip curling with distaste. Teal smirked. He's just mad we ruined his outfit last summer. My rare Anaconda print suit, Trisme hissed. Listen, bird boy, it's Tio, he snapped. Don't you remember what it was like being a lowly jay close to potential Sunbearer? Or has no one ever wanted to get close to you? Tio, his mom gasped, but Tio refused to be sorry. So you agree? Trisme brought a small recorder close to his mouth. Tio, son of Quetzal, believes his closest friend, Nia, daughter of Terror, is a likely Sunbearer. Verdad rolled her eyes at her brother, flipped her notebook closed, and strode away without a word to any of them. At what point does journalism become harassment? Mala Suerte drawled. Trisme smiled serenely. I haven't found out. He turned back to his photographers. We can at least get a picture of all the Jave rejects in the dark corner. Quetzal managed a patient and tired smile, but poor Phantasma seized up entirely, her eyes growing wide as she stepped back into the shadows and disappeared. I wouldn't recommend it, Mala Suerte said, casually lifting an upturned palm. Shame if all today's negatives were overexposed. Trisme's mechanical grin twitched. Fine. We have actual celebrities to interview anyway. They turned on their heels and stalked away, the photographer scrambling after. Quetzal gave Teal's hand a quick squeeze. I'm going to say hello to some old friends. I'll see you at the ceremony? Tio nodded. Okay. As he watched his mom leave, he heard a metal clatter, quickly followed by the shattering of what must have been a camera lens. Trisme's angry voice cut through the murmurings of the crowd. Fool! Deep chuckles rumbled in Mala Suerte's chest. When Tio looked over, the god shrugged. Whoops, he said with a wicked grin. This time, Tio couldn't help returning it. Chapter 4. Tio! A familiar voice called from the crowd. Yermak took a large step to the side a split second before Tio felt like he was hit by a bus. Tio let out a strangled yelp as he was scooped off his feet in a vice-like hug. Force made his wing joints pop. Hey, Nia, he greeted her with his weak smile. At well over 6 feet, Nia had to look down as she beamed happily at Tio. In addition to her height, Nia was incredibly muscular, with broad shoulders and huge biceps. She had a heart-shaped face and prominent chin, with deep brown hair that was tied into 2 long braids. "Hey, Tio, you're so short! It was hard for me to find you," she scolded affectionately as her hazel eyes, the color of palm fronds and wet earth, danced with amusement. "I'm not short," he scowled. "I think you bruised my ribs," he added, gingerly pressing a hand against them. She laughed, loud and unabashed. "Sorry." It was hard to stay mad at someone who was so warm and happy to see him. That, along with how little she understood personal space, made Nia a lot like a puppy. If said puppy were the size of a bull and able to break you in half with no effort. "Wait a second." Nia leaned into Tio again and sniffed his hair before jerking back. "You stink like smoke," she said, waving her hand in front of her nose. "The heck happened?" Tio tried to shove her, but Nia barely budged. "Long story short, there was a fire in Quetzalcoatl. I got a bit too close." "Oh no," Nia groaned dramatically. "Did the twins show up?" Tio nodded. She didn't need to know all the humiliating details. "That explains it. You smell just like them," Nia said with a smirk. Tio attempted to cover his hair with his hands. "No, I don't." "Well, I'm glad you didn't get roasted," she told him in typical Nia fashion. "I like this," she added, switching topics at breakneck pace as she petted the feathers of Tio's cape. "Feel like I've been tarred and feathered," Tio grumbled, pushing her circlet back into place. "Yours is—" He hesitated as he took in what Nia was wearing. Barefoot as usual, she wore a white wrapped skirt that ended high on her absolutely massive thighs. Gold pendants the size of Tio's hand hung around her waist from a belt, engraved with the same glyph as the gold pectorals sitting on her chest. As a daughter of Tira, the god of earth, the glyph bore the likeness of 3 jagged mountains with the sun peeking from behind them. Matching discs adorned her ears, and gold bands sat above her thick biceps. "Dios, how are you freezing?" Tio asked, laughter jumping in his throat. Nia cocked her hip and tossed her braid over her shoulder. "Listen, I'm shredded. It's not right to cover it up. It's better if they make me wear this." Scowling, she tucked on her white bandeau top. "I don't see why my brothers can have their titties out, but I can't. Theirs are even bigger than mine," she announced loudly, throwing her hands up and getting looks from a group of nearby priests. There was no filter between Nia's head and her mouth. She just thought thoughts and said words. "Humac!" she exclaimed, eyes landing on the priest at Tio's side. "I missed you." When she spread her arms, Humac's back went rigid. "Nia," it was supposed to be a hello, but it sounded more like a warning. When Tio and Nia became friends, Humac took on the role of guardian for both of them whenever they were at Soul Temple. Nia had her own priest to look after her, of course, but Humac seemed to be the only one she listened to. "I'm going to make my rounds," Humac announced. "You too." He eyed Tio and Nia suspiciously. "For the love of Soul, please be on your best behavior." Nia's arms fell to her sides, bottom lip jutting. "Is he still mad about Dia de Muertos?" she asked Tio, eyes following Humac's retreating back. Tio shrugged. "Probably." "Come on, let's eat, and you can catch me up on all things Tio and Quetzalcoatl. I want to know everything," she said, grabbing Tio's hand and dragging him to the food tables. He couldn't help smiling. It was good to have his best friend back. Long tables piled high with steaming tamales and arepas lined the outer edges of the cavernous event hall. As they joined the buffet line, Tio eyed some yellow tortillas next to lines of juicy carne asada and spicy carnitas. Dios Maize, the god of the harvest, and Dios Pan Dulce, the sweet goddess of the hearth, had really outdone themselves. By the time Tio and Nia were ready to find their seats, he was struggling to balance the heaping tower of food on his plate. The golds took up the larger tables around the main statue, while Jade squeezed into smaller ones around the outer edge. Tio couldn't help observing how the seating arrangements mirrored the placement of the cities across Reino del Sol. Nia didn't even hesitate to follow Tio to a small, rickety table on the outskirts. They passed Marino, who was dressed in a tunic accented with pastel coral, pink seashells, and polished sea glass in every shade of blue imaginable. His mother, Diosa Agua, stood next to him. Her black skin glowed like the ocean under moonlight, her gray eyes glinting like abalone shells. The side of her head was shaved and her blue hair tumbled over her shoulder like a waterfall. Tio filled Nia on everything he'd been up to that they hadn't covered over late night texts. Nia had lived at the academy since she was 7, so he couldn't go visit her, and when she got days off, she spent them with her dads back home. "Other than the fire, Quetzalcoatl has been pretty boring, honestly," Tio confessed as he sipped on fresh mango juice. "Unless you count talking a flock of flamingos and relocating from the fountain in front of City Hall." "That sounds fun to me," Nia said, but her enthusiasm dimmed when her gaze shifted past Tio's shoulder. "Ugh, great, here come the twins," she grumbled, angrily taking a big bite of steak. Tio glanced back. Tension pinched his shoulders. Aurelio and Aristella descended the stairs side by side, in matching black pants and sleeveless tunics with gold and red embroidery that imitated flames, closely followed by their mother. Large pectoral adornments made of real burning coals covered Aurelio's and Aristella's chests. Chatter immediately broke out. In the world of half-gods, Aurelio and Aristella were basically royalty. Diosa Lumbre was the head of the academy and had a long line of semidioses who were not only famous heroes but Sunbearers. Lumbre scanned the crowd, silently observing the priests and semidioses with eyes that smoldered with liquid fire. Every angle of her face was severe. Tio had never seen the goddess smile a day in her life. Diosa Lumbre was intimidating, sure, but Tio's loathing for her was so strong it canceled out any possible fear. Aurelio and Aristella moved through the crowd, greeting people as they passed. Chisme and Verdad pushed to the front, the photographers rapidly snapping pictures. Aristella smiled and posed like some celebrity walking down the red carpet, talking animatedly with Chisme. Meanwhile, Aurelio stood by her side, looking stoic and maybe even a touch uncomfortable as lights flashed in his face. He adjusted his pectoral. Thin chains arched across the curve of his bicep from his signature golden armbands to small loops hanging from the golden neckpiece. There was always something about Aurelio, the glow of his skin, the burning intensity of his eyes, that made Tio wonder if he was favored by Sol. They were all half-gods, but it was like Aurelio had been touched by the sun itself. Like if Tio looked at him for too long, he burned him from the inside out. Someone called Aurelio's name, and as he scanned the room, his eyes caught Tio's. It was only a second, long enough for recognition to flash across Aurelio's face and heat to burn in Tio's chest, before he quickly looked away. It was bad that Aurelio had just saved Tio's sorry ass from burning up in a fire. Now Tio had to watch him bask in all his golden glory at the trials, too. When Tio saw another glance, Aurelio had already turned, swept up in conversation with his sister. Tio turned back to Nia, desperate for a change of subject. "How's the academy?" "Rough. They've been really kicking our asses," Nia said between bites of food. "With the trials coming up, they've amped up training. We're doing drills constantly," she groaned, practically slumping on the table. "They'll summon us during dinner or even in the middle of the night to run different disaster scenarios and rescues." Nia scrunched her face up in a scowl and imitated Diosa Lumbre's sharp, bossy voice. "If you want to be in trials, you need to train harder, move faster, get stronger. Only the best will be chosen." When she put it like that, it was easy for him not to feel like he was missing out. "Sounds like a pain in the ass to me." "Sounds like a pain in the ass if you ask me," Tio replied. She smiled deeply. "It is, but..." Nia gave him a sheepish smile. "I still love helping people." "And competition," Tio added. She sat up straighter and grinned. "I'm fourth in the class right now." Tio forced a smile, ignoring the heavy weight that dropped into his stomach. "I'm really happy for you, Nia." He was proud of her, of how well she was doing in the academy, but he was also scared. If she was ranked fourth in the class, it seemed inevitable that she would be chosen for the trials. This worry turned into a recurring nightmare for Tio. With the opening ceremony only a handful of hours away, he couldn't help feeling like his greatest fear was about to come true. "Nia," Tio said carefully, "do you want to be chosen for the trials?" Nia bit her lip. I know they're just more stupid gold showboating, but they're also, I don't know, important? I mean, it's an honor, right?" "Should you risk your life for this?" Tio asked, gesturing around the room. This, meaning the pomp and circumstance of it all. The gold. "No, not for this," Nia said, shaking her head. "For our people. To uphold soul sacrifice and keep Reino del Sol safe." Tio held his tongue. The worst possible scenario consumed his thoughts. His best friend lay on the altar at the end of the trials, and Tio unable to do anything but watch. "Aye, look, the triad of douchebaggery is complete," Nia said, pulling him back to the present. Tio looked around and looked at the latest semidiose to enter the hall, the twins' terrible sidekick, Ocello. As they walked down the stairs, Ocello's thickly muscled arms swung back and forth, like they were some kind of cartoon villain. Diose Guerreros trailed behind their child. With a jaguar head, yellow eyes, and battle-scarred face, Tio found Diose Guerrero the most intimidating of the gods. Aurelio and Aristella were pompous elites. Elitists, yes, but Ocello was an obnoxious narcissist. They were shorter than Tio, probably somewhere around 5'5", which was short for a demigod, but held themselves like they were 7 feet tall. They wore a cape knotted on their left shoulder, draped diagonally across their bodies so as to display the gloof of a jaguar head. Their hair was always buzzed short, and they decided to dye it like jaguar spots for the special occasion. Ocello was the only semidiose whose physique came anywhere near rivaling Nia's. A small group of Jade demigods chatted in a group, blocking Ocello from where Chisme and Verdad were fawning over Aurelio and Aristella. Instead of asking them to move, just going around them like a normal person, Ocello shouldered their way right through, sending the semidioses stumbling out of their way. Tio clenched his jaw, frustrated that Ocello was able to get away with such blatant disrespect. Then he got an idea. Tio nudged Nia. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" he asked under his breath. "No," she whispered back, "but whatever it is, I'm game." Tio pulled Nia with him, dodging people as they slunk to the edge of the stairs. Ocello was nearly at the bottom when they crouched into position behind an unused table. Tia pinched Nia's elbow, pointing to where gold fasteners accented Acello's leather sandals. Want to send them on a little trip down the stairs? A wicked grin curled Nia's lips. Nia clenched her hand into a fist, and the pieces of gold shuddered. Quickly, she tugged, and the fasteners, along with the shoes and feet inside them, jerked. Acello stumbled, pitching forward and tumbling head over heels down the stairs. They landed in a heap at the front of the steps. Red cape flipped over their head. Gasps rose from the crowd, and the photographers swarmed, cameras flashing wildly. Acello thrashed until they freed themselves from their cape and leapt to their feet. They spun around, seething as their yellow-green eyes searched for their culprit. Tia and Nia dropped below their table, dissolving into fits of laughter. "Oh my gods, I can't breathe!" Nia said, arms wrapped around her stomach as she cackled. "Did you see their face?" "Pure gold," Tia agreed, wiping a tear from his eye. There was something so satisfying about seeing an asshole get what they deserve. Above, someone cleared their throat. Tia and Nia's laughter died as they looked up to find Humac standing over them. He stared down at them, an exasperated expression on his face. The pair quickly jumped to their feet. "Not very graceful for a cat, huh, Humac?" Tia said with a solemn shake of his head. One of Humac's bushy eyebrows arched. "They could have gotten hurt." "They didn't, though, see?" Nia said, gesturing at Acello, who was red-faced and stomping away. "Yeah, nothing but their ego," Tia added, trying to hold back a laugh. Nia nodded. "Probably why they fell over in the first place." "Big head," Tia agreed. "Very top-heavy." "Actions have more than your intended consequences," Humac said. "Tell it to Acello on their whole," Tia gestured vaguely. "Everything." "Acello is not my responsibility," Humac said tersely, "or obliged to follow my rules. I don't think either of your parents would be happy about this." Nia was immediately shamefaced, but Tia was just frustrated. Acello never got in trouble for being a dick. How was that fair? Luckily, before Humac could dole out any sort of punishment, Cross started moving toward the stairs. "Look like it's time to head for the ceremony," Humac said, scanning the room. "Finally!" Nia said, grinning from ear to ear. She grabbed Tio's arm and gave it an excited shake. Tio's stomach rolled. He stuck to Nia's side, following Humac and the rest of the crowd as they started the long trek up the steps at the top of the temple where Dios and Luna waited for them at Sol's altar. "If you don't gather around, we'll get the ceremony started," Luna announced. Dios and Luna had curly dark hair streaked with silver gray, an hourglass figure, and dark, cool brown skin. Crow's feet sat at the corners of her eyes, wrinkling as she smiled at everyone gathered. The dress she wore had a plunging neckline that started out midnight blue at her shoulders and faded to a starry silver where it pooled to her sandaled feet. It was covered in tiny pinpricks of silver that mirrored the stars and constellations in the night sky. The rays of her sunburst necklace stretched out across her shoulders and clavicles, marking her as the high priestess of Sol Temple. Luna was the diosa of the sun, giving her the power to reflect the voice of Sol. Nia went off to be with her dad, but Tio went to his mom, standing with some of the other jade gods. "This way, Tio," Quetzal said, waving him forward, but before he could follow, Mala Suerte stepped into his path. "Good luck, Tio." He grinned, giving Tio's arm a squeeze before wandering off, his brood in tow and Zio sticking close to his side. "I can never tell if he's messing with me or not," Tio said to his mom as they joined the crowd gathering around the altar. "I think most of it is just for show," Quetzal agreed with a sad sort of sigh. "People treat you like you're bad enough for long. I imagine you start believing it. Or, as I think might be the case with Suerte, playing it up for fun." As they got into position, Tio craned his neck in search of Nia. He found her on the other side of the room, bouncing the balls of her feet, practically vibrating with excitement. Terra stood behind her with her older brothers, Monte and Mino, who flanked him like centennials. Dios Terra wore a black suit with gold embroidered accents that reflected his glyph, and a crimson tie. Leather gloves and simple gold mask that cast his eyes in shadow covered his skinless flesh. "The last person you need to worry about is Nia," Quetzal told Tio, smoothing her hand over his covered wings. "She will do just fine." "I know," Tio said as he watched his best friend greet her family. Nia said something to Monte, who grinned and bounced his peck in turn. Nia punched his arm while Mino threw his head back with a bark-like laugh. "Dioses and semi-dioses," Luna said, her voice carrying over the crowd, which immediately hushed. A younger Sol priest stood next to her, interpreting what she said in sign language. Diose Sol and I welcome you to Sol Temple to celebrate the end of this decade and the start of the next." She lifted her hands to the Sol Stone, which silently turned and glowed with a golden light. Luna smiled and pressed her palms together. "This is the time to give thanks to Sol for the good fortune they have brought us, and remember all they have given so that we may live. Every 10 years, the sun's power must be replenished so that Sol can continue their path to the sky, keeping our world safe from the obsidians and monsters that have been locked in their celestial bindings," Luna explained. 10 eligible semi-dioses between the ages of 13 and 18 are selected as the worthiest to compete in the Sunbearer trials. The winner will be chosen by Sol as this decade's Sunbearer and join the distinguished ranks of our past champions. Luna gestured to where a line of semi-dioses stood, all wearing golden sunburst crowns. They were all golds, of course, and Diosa Lombre's glyph was the most common hanging around their necks. They ranged in age from the youngest, Brillo, who was 27, to Arnu, a semidios of Diose Guerrero, who was 148. Our Sunbearer will travel through Reino del Sol and refuel the sunstones of each city's temple. Luna paused long enough to let her gaze travel around the open-air observatory. But as the semidiose who becomes the sacrifice, who is the greatest honor of all. Tio shifted uneasily next to his mother. He'd heard this story enough times to know what came next. What had kept him up late at night these past weeks leading up to the Sunbearer trials. What made him terrified of Nia being chosen to compete. To be sacrificed a soul and have their body melt into the elixir that will refuel the sunstones so they can continue to provide safety and protection to all of us for the next 10 years. Diosa Luna approached the altar and stood next to the cloth-covered rectangle. In one swift movement, she unveiled what was underneath. The sacrificial stone slab was covered in intricate engravings of the sun and webs of constellations. It rested on top of a stack of golden skulls. They all belonged to past semidioses who had died in sacrifice to keep the sunstones burning. After Terra melted their bodies, he saved their skulls, plated them in gold, and engraved their names in thin script across the forehead. Tio looked back to this line of former Sunbearers. They did not turn to face the skulls of the dead. Just as we honor soul, we honor our lives to semidioses who sacrificed themselves, to remind us what they gave so that all of us may live, Luna said. Without the sacrifice, Reino del Sol will fall to inevitable destruction. Tio clenched his hands into fists, willing his knees not to shake. It sounded so noble, but Tio didn't want his best friend to end up among the pile of skulls. Someone had to keep the world from ending, just not Nia. Diosis, Luna said, looking out into the crowd, please present your children for soul selection. As everyone around him started to move, Tio froze. Don't worry, Pajarito, his mom said, her soft feathers brushing his cheek as she kissed the top of his head. You'll be fine. He knew she was right, but it wasn't his fate he was worried about. Tio's movements were mechanical as he followed the other semidioses, forming a ring around the soul stone floating above their heads. Tio desperately searched for Nia and spotted her across the way. She smiled and gave Tio a small wink. All he could do was stand there between two other jades, cacti, child of the goddess of Agave, and Juanita, daughter of the god of lost things, rooted to the floor. Sweat prickled his brow and ran down the middle of his back under his binder. He tried to steady his breathing, to avoid fainting right there in front of everyone. Silence hung thick as they all waited. Gradually, a hum filled the air and the soul stone grew brighter, pulsing in time with Theo's thundering heartbeat. A flash of light sparked at Theo's left. A sunburst crown appeared on Ocello's buzzed head. A wicked grin cut their features as they basked in the honor of being the first one selected by Sol. Diose Guerrero beamed proudly, their fangs glinting. With another flash of light, a crown appeared on Marino's head. The water semidiosis let out a breath, shoulders slumping in relief. A third flash and a crown appeared on Aristella's head. She stood in a gasp, nearly jumping with excitement before she seemed to remember herself and returned to standing with her arms held straight at her sides. Still, Tio saw the corners of her mouth twitching in a suppressed grin. Besides her, Aurelia didn't so much as flinch. His expression remained unreadable as he stared up at the sunstone, waiting. For a moment, Tio wondered if Aurelia was jealous of his sister, but then there was another flare of light. A gleaming crown appeared on Aurelia's head. His eyelids fluttered in relief. Aristella latched onto her brother's wrist, doing her best to trap her grin between her teeth. The crowd broke out into hushed chatter. Even Tio's lips parted in surprise. A set of siblings, let alone twins, had never been selected to compete in the trials in the same year, as far as he knew. The confused and surprised expressions around the room confirmed his suspicion. Diosa Lumbre, however, didn't seem at all shocked. In fact, she stood motionless, almost bored. A strange feeling that Tio couldn't define churned in his stomach as he watched Aurelio. He hadn't let himself think of it before tonight, but here it was, possible to look away from. Aurelia would be competing in the Sunbearer trials. Tio shook his head at himself. Now wasn't the time to worry over Aurelio's fate. Tio pushed his feather circlet up out of his eyes only to realize his hands were trembling. One by one, 3 more gold semidioses were selected. When Atsi, the 13-year-old semidiosa, was chosen, Tio could hear the approving rumble of thunder from her father, Tormentoso. I fucked that name up. Tormentoso. Next was Xochi, the semidiosa of spring, dressed in flowers. Her mother, Primavera, excitedly hugged her diosa sisters. The Estaciones, the goddesses of the seasons, were a tight-knit group of tias who absolutely fought over Xochi. Desi, the son of Diosa Amor, was also selected. Tio didn't know much about him other than that he was astoundingly gorgeous. In the center of his tunic he bore his mother's glyph, an atomical heart on fire. There were only 3 spots left. For a moment, Tio let himself hope. Maybe Nia wouldn't be chosen, and then they'd sit to spend the next 10 days together, watching the trials and getting sick on candy. Not Nia, not Nia, not Nia. But that hope was short-lived. In the flash of light, a sunburst crown sparked from Nia's head. Teo's heart clenched. A huge smile lit up Nia's face, and she immediately turned to her brothers, who clapped and whooped, ignoring the customary silence. Meanwhile, Tara's gloved hands gripped his tie. The back of Teo's throat burned as he tried to swallow. He couldn't panic, not while he was standing in a room full of people. It wasn't a guaranteed death sentence, he tried to remind himself. This was Nia. She didn't lose anything, especially not the trials. She'd be okay. She just needed to get through it and not come in last place. A flash of light, far too close, snapped Teo from his thoughts. This time, surprised voices erupted from the crowd. Heads swiveled. The newly selected Semedios was only 2 people down from his left, and it was... A jolt shot through him. The large crown sitting atop Zio's curly hair made him look so small compared to the golds. Zio? But he was a jade. The world beneath Teo's feet seemed to lurch. He turned back to his mom to find her looking as shocked as he felt, her brows pinched in confusion. Another flash. Too close. Too bright and disorienting. Teo squinted. Across the circle, Nia stared at him, alarmed. For some reason, he sat out Aurelio. The boy's lips were softly parted, eyes wide and looking right at him, the most emotion Teo had seen on Aurelio's face in years. Over the growing noise of the crowd, Teo heard his mom gasp but didn't know why. He turned to her but felt a sudden shifted weight on his head. He went to push his feather circlet back in place, but when Neo reached up, his fingers touched the cold rays of a sunburst crown. Chapter 5. Teo's feet moved under him, but he had no idea where he was going. Camera flashes exploded in his vision as people passed in a blur, murmuring and stepping out of the way while someone guided him to the observatory and down the main steps. There was a groan of wooden doors opening and then closing up again behind him. All other sounds were muffled except for the thunderous pounding of his pulse. Teo? His mom's face materialized before him. Her hands were on his shoulders. She never squeezed him so hard. Teo, Quetzal repeated, voice tight. Deep creases puckered the smooth skin between her delicate brows. Teo didn't want to see it. Just past her shoulder stood an astronomical clock. The main dial represented the position of the sun, moon, and planets, nearly in alignment now, in the sky. The calendar dial with medallions representing the months was encircled by another that displayed the gods' glyphs. A deep, hollow ticking sounded from deep within. You need to take a deep breath, Pajarito. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The crushing weight of reality dropped onto him. Wait, no! He jerked back from his mom, suddenly, acutely, aware of his heart hammering in his chest. This isn't possible! I can't compete in the trials, he said, a strangled laugh catching in his throat. This couldn't be real. It was a fever dream or maybe some kind of sick joke. Searing, he clawed up Teo's throat. His lungs fought against his binder, but it would tighten around his ribs like a giant fist. Focus on your breathing, Teo, Quetzal said, her voice infuriatingly calm as she slowly moved a step closer. Teo shook his head fiercely. I can't. There's no way! The circle of feathers slipped down his forehead. Sunburst crown tilted to the side. He ripped the crown off his head and hurled it across the room. Metal clattered over stone as it skidded across the floor before hitting the base of the clock. In a blink, it disappeared. The heavy weight dropped back onto his head. He yanked it off again and held it out in front of him. The gold glinted dully. The cold, pointed rays dug into his clutching fingers. Teo's head swam, the room gently swaying around him. I don't want this, he insisted, looking to his mom for help. She only stared at him, delicate hands pressed over her mouth as her black eyes glistened. Behind them, the doors groaned open. Luna walked in. Instead of being outraged or confused, she only watched Teo, still and silent. How could she be so calm when the world was ending? This is some kind of mistake, Teo said to the goddess, desperate for some sort of reaction. I'm just a jade. Another wild laugh shook through him. I can't compete in the Sunbearer trials. Soul chose you, Luna said, voice steady. Her dark eyes shone with tiny pinpricks of silver, like stars. You must compete in the trials. How am I supposed to compete with the golds? I'm not a hero. They've been training for their whole lives for this, and I'm not even allowed to go to the same school, Teo shouted, clutching the sunburst crown in trembling hands. I don't want to be the Sunbearer. Not when someone had to die. Luna's expression remained placid, but Quetzal flinched. Teo spun to face his mom. Mom, tell her! Teo's mom pressed her lips between her teeth for a moment. Teo could see her throat dip in a swallow before she spoke slowly and carefully. I know you're scared, Teo. She waited for her to tell him that it was going to be okay, that this was all a huge mistake, that they could go home right now, that he was going to be all right. But as he stood there, waiting, no reassurances came. She could only stare at him, at a complete loss for words. A shiver dragged down Teo's spine. Why wouldn't she tell him it'd be okay? In the heavy silence, the clock continued to tick. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Mom? It was little more than a croak before the doors banged open. A high-pitched ringing made all three flinch and clamp their hands over their ears. Luna! Mala swore they bellowed. The Dios radiated dark energy, trembling around his fingers like smoke. Tio stumbled back into his mom, but Luna straightened, wincing but not budging as the Dios charged toward her. You tell Sol they cannot have Zio for their games! Malasuerte's voice trembled through every bone in Tio's body, a terrible, thundering sound. Malasuerte towered over Luna, but she didn't back down. Sol has chosen Zio to compete in the trials, Luna said, her voice steady and unwavering. An ugly snarl curled Malasuerte's mouth, pulling back to reveal sharp, growing teeth. Sol is wrong! Suerte, Quetzal warned. The ear-splitting ringing grew louder with the god's rage. Tio bit his tongue and resisted the urge to scratch the aging palm of his left hand. It was then that Tio noticed Zio. He stood behind his father, so small in comparison. He covered his ears with his hands, squinting up at his dad. Sunburst crown still sat crooked on his mop of curls. Sol is not wrong, Luna said, lifting her chin. And they do not make mistakes. Zio was chosen for a reason. The whites of Malasuerte's eyes turned blood red as his form shook violently. Third eye peeled open on his forehead, pupils staring a startling blue as the god grew larger until he was hunched over Luna. The room trembled and, for a moment, Tio's fear of Malasuerte's shoulders burst the ceiling. I would tear the city to the ground before I let you take him from me! Malasuerte's skin glowed scarlet, washing the room in red. With a sudden jerk, Quetzal grabbed Tio. Her wings enveloped him, blocking Tio and covering his eyes from seeing the enraged god. Tio tried to let his legs give out from under him. He had heard stories of how if a Dios lost their temper, the sheer force of their wrath could melt anyone less than a god who's standing too close. Stop this before you do something you regret, Luna said, sternly. Zio is my son! Malasuerte roared. Tio squeezed his eyes shut as the ringing cut through his head. His mom tightened her arms around him. The itching was unbearable, like ants burrowing under his skin. Dad, stop! The quiet voice somehow cut through all the noise. The ringing in Tio's ears slowly ebbed. Hesitantly, his mom loosened her grip. We both know there's nothing you can do. Carefully, Tio peeked out from behind his mother's wing. Malasuerte, still giant and terrifying, looked out at his son. Just want to get it over with, the young boy said, chin lowered and cheeks red. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Because Malasuerte's back was to him, Tio couldn't see his face. Please, Zio asked. The ringing in Tio's ear and the itching of his palm faded away. With a long, low sigh, the god of bad luck shrank until he was back to his usual size. Malasuerte's shoulders bowed over his chest, arms falling to his sides. Zio stepped closer, and Malasuerte lowered his large hand on the back of his son's head, behind the sunburst crown. Wait here, Quetzal told Tio. He watched as his mom and Diosa Luna spoke in hushed tones to Zio and Malasuerte. Compared to Zio, Tio's situation didn't seem nearly as dire. Zio had only just turned 13 a couple months ago. He hadn't even hit a growth spurt yet, still in around baby cheeks. Zio was only a jade, the son of Malasuerte, at that. What awful luck. Would Sol really select both of them only to be decimated in the competition? Tio averted his gaze, a lump forming in his throat. He looked around the room, taking in their surroundings. They were below the observatory. Across from the clock was a desk that, judging by the star charts and astronomical instruments, must belong to Luna. The map of Reino del Sol had been engraved into the surface, the different cities noted by small figurines of each god's glyph carved from pieces of gold and jade. Around the room, murals with faceless figures and brightly colored scenes were painted on the walls. Tio realized that they told the story of Reino del Sol. There was the creation of the world and the breaking of the seven-pointed star. Dark celestial figures fighting the golden jade dioses illustrated the war with the obsidians. The final mirror showed the people of Reino del Sol living happily under the golden sunburst, but was a scene just before it that Tio observed for a closer look. The gods stood in a circle, holding the sunstones in their outstretched hands. Tio spotted his mom with blue and green wings right away. In the center, Terra was on his knees, surrounded with swirls of red and orange fire. Sol lay dying in his arms. Their body was painted in metallic gold, a dagger in their chest and crimson rivulets of blood spilling around them. On the wall, the click ticked away. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Luna led Tio and Zio inside Sol Temple, leaving their parents behind. His mama told him that the gods weren't allowed to visit their children during the trials to avoid cheating, but that she would be there to watch every event. When the rankings were displayed at the end of each trial, they could steal a moment together, and then there would be a final banquet with their families the night before the last trial. As he followed Luna through the opulent halls, Tio's mind spun, trying to think his way out of this mess. If he snuck out the temple, he'd have to steal a boat. If he made it that far, he'd have to pass through the waterfalls, which were operated by the soul priests. And even if he somehow got through them, what would he do? He couldn't go home to Quetzalcoatl, so at best, he'd be on the run for the rest of his life. Or worst. Well, he wasn't sure what the punishment was for deserting the trials, but given what happened during the closing ceremony, it was probably nothing good. The only thing he could do was not get himself killed. If he could stay high enough in the rankings to not come in last, he could survive this. Teal stole a glance over at Zio. The younger boy followed the moon goddess silently, eyes downcast. His expression was blank, like he'd already reassigned himself to his fate. Teal hated it. There was a distant sound of chatter before they ran out a corner and found the golds. They were in a group, talking among themselves, except for Nia, who was off to the side pacing back and forth. As they approached, the talking stopped and everyone turned. Ati was braiding Xochitl's hair on an emerald green velvet couch while Marino and Desi leaned against the arms. Estella smirked, looking Teal up and down while Estella shook her head and a muse quirked her lips as she whispered to Estella. And there was Aurelio. He frowned at Teal, staring at him almost calculatingly as the coal smoldered around his neck. Teal's face burned with heat. "Dude!" Neo shoved him and he stumbled. "The fuck?" "I have no idea," he replied, trying to keep his voice down. "This is wild." "I know." Nia yanked him into a hug, lifting him off his feet. "We're gonna have so much fun together!" Surprised light jumped into Teal's throat. Leave it to Nia to see the silver lining of his probable death sentence. "You always talk about how you wish you could see the other cities," she said, setting him back down. "Yeah, but not like this," Teal hissed under his breath. "I was supposed to be in the stands, watching the Sunbearer trials, not competing in them." But Nia didn't seem to get it. "We can hang out, stay up late talking and playing games," she rattled off happily. "Couldn't even teach you how to fight." Teal blinked at her. Was she serious? A terrible scene played out in his mind's eye. Nia, the Sunbearer, standing over his lifeless, sacrificial corpse. Thankfully, he didn't need to come up with a response because Luna called them all to attention. "Congratulations, competitors, on being chosen for the Sunbearer trials," Diosa Luna said. "I think we've all had a long day, so if you'll follow me, I'll show you to your rooms for the night," she said, signing as she spoke. "This way." The golds fell into a step behind the Diosa, excitedly murmuring to one another. Zio followed them at a safe distance, and Tio and Nia lingered at the very back. "Why is she signing?" Tio asked Nia. "Desi's deaf," she said with a shrug. Desi was tall and had deep, warm black skin and a high face with sponge curls. He was objectively beautiful, but not in a chiseled, supermodel kind of way. He had soft features, kind eyes, and a sweet sort of smile that made your legs feel like jello. Desi followed Luna, watching her hands attentively as she led them down the hall. "He's like a total badass. We all know he'd get picked," Nia went on. "He's really strong, super smart, and the powers he got from his mom?" Nia let out a low whistle. "What are his powers?" Tio asked, but they were interrupted before Nia could answer. "You'll be staying here tonight, but tomorrow we will be boarding the boat to travel to the first host city after breakfast," Diosa Luna announced as they walked. "This is the beginning of a very long journey for all of you, so I suggest getting as much sleep as you can." "Can we check out the rest of the temple?" Xochitl asked, a hopeful lift in her voice. Luna smiled. "No, you may not." She addressed the group. "You are only allowed to see your parents at the beginning and the end of each trial, and communicating with any of your priests is considered a conflict of interest." "Cheating," Marana said and signed to his friends. "However, there will be sole priests available 24/7 throughout the competition. If you need something, just ask them," Luna continued. A pair of sole priests stood on either end of the next doorway, smiling as they passed through. Tio wasn't sure if they were actually there to assist or guard. Neo gave Tio's arm a nudge and nodded towards Zio. "How's he taking it?" she whispered. The younger boy stood off to the side, nervously twisting a bracelet on his wrist. Tio winced. "Better than his dad, I guess." "This door leads to the dining room and kitchen," Luna went on. "Diosa Pandolce and Dios Mays kindly volunteered their services for the duration of the trials. They'll cater all your meals during our trials, and if you need something in between, you may ask them." "What happened?" Neo whispered. Tio quickly filled her in on how Mela Suerte completely lost his shit. Neo frowned. "Huh. What?" Neo shrugged. "I'm surprised, is all. Mela Suerte always seemed kind of..." She tipped her head from side to side. "Aloof? Does that mean full of himself and acts like he isn't bothered by anything?" "Yes." "Then yes." "I really don't think Zio's anybody else, even outside of the trials. He seems like kind of a loner," Tio said. His chest was tight as he watched Zio look around the room, giving Aurelia and the others a wide berth. "My little troublemaker," Mela Suerte had said. Tio turned to Nia. "We should try to look out for him." Nia's eyebrows lifted. "Yeah?" "Yeah, I mean, he's a defenseless little 13-year-old. And he's a jade," he added. "We haven't been trained for any of this shit. It's not like Soul chose us just to be an easy sacrifice." Nia finally looked worried. "I didn't think about that." Oh, it's like so, chose us. And outcasts need to stick together, right? Teal asked, nudging her with his elbow. Right, Nia replied, already convinced. Around another corner, Luna showed them to their sleeping quarters. A long hallway stretched out between them, lined with doors, each of which had a Dios glyphs on the front. Your priest already brought up your belongings. This is where I leave you, Luna said. I need to go reconvene with the other Dioses. For some reason, her starry gaze lingered on Tio. I would suggest turning in early and getting a good night's sleep. Tomorrow we will begin our journey. Tio's room was at the very end of the hall, right across from Zio's. He thought he should say something to the younger Jade, offer him some kind of reassurance, but Zio ducked into his room without so much as pausing, the door snapping shut behind him. Inside, Tio's first thought was to wonder whether or not his contraband had made it, but that was quickly replaced with shock over how big his room was. He had his own living quarters back at Quetzal Temple, but he just had the same lumpy twin bed and cheap furniture that he had since he was a toddler. This place was so fancy. For such an old temple, they really hadn't skimped on interior renovations. There was a large window with expensive-looking drapes, gold furniture, and a door that he assumed led to the bathroom. When he turned to inspect the massive bed, Tio nearly jumped out of his skin to find someone waiting next to it. "Humac!" Tio gasped, clutching a hand over his chest. "You scared the shit out of me!" "I can't stay for long," Humac interrupted in a hushed tone, crossing the room so quickly he made Tio stumble back. Humac's dark eyes locked on Tio, his posture rigid. Tio had known Humac his entire life, and not once had he ever seen the head priest of Quetzal break a single rule. "What are you—" Humac gripped his shoulders and squeezed him tight. "Be quick on your feet around Xochi, and steer clear of water, or else Marino and Nazi will use it against you." He spoke so quickly, Tio struggled to keep up. Don't get near Desi during competition. You can outsmart Ocello. They may have brute strength, but they lack technical strategy. You're clever and you're fast. Use it to your advantage. And Tio?" He blinked up at Humac, at a total loss for words. Humac leveled him a hard stare. "Stay out of Aurelio and Aristella's way." Tio jumped as the door behind him creaked. Nia stood there, having already changed it to a loose white crop top and a pair of spandex shorts. When she saw Tio and Humac, she froze. Humac released Tio and stood up straight. "I have to go now," he said. "I put your backpack in the armoire," he added, giving Tio a pointed look before swiftly exiting the room. Nia looked back and forth between Tio and the empty hallway. "I thought we weren't allowed to talk to our priests," she said, face screwed up in confusion. "We're not," Tio said, rubbing his shoulder where Humac's fingers had gripped him. "Then what was he doing here?" "Giving me advice, I think," Tio murmured. It was so unlike Humac to do anything against protocol. It was unsettling. Did he really think Tio was in that deep of trouble? He told me how to deal with the golds during the trials. Nia gasped and quickly closed the door behind her. "Humac was cheating?" she hissed under her breath. "I'm impressed," Nia laughed. "What did he say about me?" "Nothing." Nia scoffed. Tio rolled her eyes. "What's up?" "Oh," Nia said, as if just remembering. "I was going to see if you wanted to raid the kitchen." An amused grin tugged the corner of Tio's mouth. In all the chaos, at least he could rely on Nia's insatiable appetite. "I'm down," he said as he took off the circlet and sunburst crown, tossing them onto the bed. This time, the crown stayed put. "I think we should invite Zio, too." "Oh, we're going to have our own little misfit gang!" Nia grinned as she leaned against the closed door, crossing arms over her chest. Tio removed his heavy feathered cape and then hesitated. He glanced around the room. "Where's the armoire?" "What's an armoire?" "I was hoping you'd know." Tio and Nia exchanged a look before breaking into laughter. It felt good and released some of the tension from his shoulders. If he had to face the trials, at least he had Nia to face them with. At least he wasn't alone. Chapter 6. Tio swapped his regalia for comfy sweatpants and a tee. "Try not to freak him out, okay?" he told Nia as they crossed the hall. "What do you mean?" she asked with a frown, stopping outside of Zio's door. "I mean, I think he's pretty nervous and you can come out a little, you know." He gestured at her full 6'something height and built frame. But apparently Nia didn't get it because she just tipped her head to the side. "Strong," Tio clarified with a chuckle. "What's wrong with strong?" she demanded, propping her hands on her hips. "And scary," he added. "I'm not scary," Nia barked, to which Tio cocked an eyebrow. She scowled. "Shut up! I am very friendly and totally not scary." Before Tio could stop her, she turned and banged her fist on the door. Unfortunately, it hadn't been closed all the way, so it flew open and slammed into the wall. Inside, Zio had been sitting on his bed, head lowered, but when Neo nearly broke down his door, he jumped, hands going up to shoot himself. "Dios," Tio groaned under his breath. Neo smiled brightly. "Hey!" Zio looked back and forced between the two of them. alarmed. Hi? Oh, sorry. Tio cringed. We were going to check out the kitchen. Do you want to come? Have you had enough to eat? Oh, are you sure? Zio said, surprised. With him in it, the bed looked massive. Maybe it just made him look extra small. People usually avoid me, Zio explained with a half-hearted shrug. You know, because of bad luck. Ouch. Poor kid. Tio thought he had it bad as a jade, but what must it be like to be a jade and a child of mala suerte when everyone thought your mere presence would bring bad luck? Zio reached to gather up the large binder and cards on his bed. I thought I made things easier by staying in my room. What's all this? Nia interrupted, plopping herself down on the bed. Oh, it's nothing. Zio tried to grab the open binder, but it wasn't quick enough for Nia. She snatched it up and flipped through the pages. Dude, nice collection! It's nothing, really, Zio said, trying to cover up the scattered cards, but it was too late. Tio realized what they were immediately. Hero trading cards were popular at school and constantly passed around by collectors. There were nearly a dozen spread across Zio's bed and even more in the binder. Each one had a picture of a hero with their basic stats listed. Damn, Tio said, pressed as he picked up a few. There were professional heroes like Marina's older sister Maria, but also golds who were still training in the academy that Tio had never even heard of. Do we have every trading card? Nearly, Zio admitted, his hands twitching like it took everything in him not to snatch them back. Neo gasped. Where's mine? She shouted, flipping wildly through the pages. That's really cool, Tio said. Zio blinked up at him. His rigid shoulders relaxed just a touch. They do a lot of reprints and updates, though, he explained tentatively. It can be hard to keep up. Tio picked up a random card and flipped over, only to be met with Aurelio's fiery eyes staring back at him. Aurelio stood in the center of the card with his arms crossed over his chest, his expression hard and maybe a little annoyed. The also lumber's fire glyph in the upper right hand corner indicated who his godly parent was, in case the gold foil flames around the edges weren't obvious enough. Tio had never seriously collected the cards himself. It was too weird, knowing his mom would never have one even with everything she did for their city, and Tio would never get one either. It was easy to end up with them, though. His birthday presents or school raffle prizes, and he had kept a little stash, till 3 years ago, when Aurelio's first card was released and found its way into a pack of Tio's favorite bodega. That afternoon, he had given his box to little Edgar next door, along with every pack he ended up with from then on, unopened. Wow, they have everything listed now. Strengths, weaknesses, special moves, Tio murmured as he fanned through a few. Look how awesome my thighs are in this one, Nia demanded, shoving the binder in Tio's face so he could see the special edition card where she was kicking a boulder clean in half. Tio leaned around Nia and gave Zio a teasing grin. You're kind of a hero nerd, huh? Red bloomed on Zio's cheeks. Yeah, I guess, he admitted. This will come in handy for the trials, Tio pointed out. Lucky you brought them with you. With this sort of encyclopedic knowledge, maybe Zio wasn't as hopeless as he originally thought. I just remembered I'm still hungry, Nia announced, handing the binder back to Zio, jumping to her feet. You should come with us, Tio insisted while Zio gathered up his cards. Everyone else is probably in bed already, and Nia and I are already black sheep anyway. It's true, Nia agreed cheerily. Tio half expected Zio to turn them down, and then the smallest glimpse of a smile curled his lips. Yeah, okay, he said, pushing his hair out of his face. Nia beamed proudly and gave Tio a look that said, Told you so, which he ignored. Zio struggled to climb out of bed, the plush blanket attempting to swallow him up. He was wearing a pair of checkered pajama pants and an old gray long-sleeve shirt. They were way too big on him, which made Tio think they may be hand-me-downs. Cool bracelet, Nia said. Around Zio's wrist was a cord bracelet that had red coral, jade eyes, and mate beads of jet. A shiny black charm in the shape of a fist with a protruding index finger knuckle dangled from it. Thanks, he murmured, quickly tugging the sleeve down over it. That's an azabache bracelet, right? Tio asked. Yeah. Zio's face turned red. It's my dad's. It's cool, Tio said, not wanting him to feel self-conscious about it. He'd only ever seen babies wear azabache bracelets for good luck back home. He supposed it made sense that Zio wore one. If you were the son of Mala Suerte, would you need good luck? Was bad luck part of your whole deal? Didn't seem like a good trait to have while competing in the Sunbearer trials. More important, Zio probably missed his dad, which is probably why he needed a distraction. Tio had been expecting a setup like a school cafeteria, with round tables and linoleum tile. Instead, the dining room they walked into was just as fancy as the rest of the temple. A long table with high-backed chairs was laden with bowls of fresh fruit. Overhead hung a large golden chandelier in the shape of the sun. Whoa, Zio said quietly, taking everything in. Seriously, Tio agreed. What? Nia asked, looking around. This place is fancy as hell, he told her. Is it? Zio gave Nia a weary glance. Tio threw his elbow into her arm. Not all of us are from gold cities, he reminded her. She's not a douche, I swear, he added to Zio. Not on purpose, Nia clarified, unfazed. Zio let out a small, surprised laugh. Two people walked in from the kitchen. Or, not people, Tio realized, but gods. Did also spotted them first, and her face lit up immediately. "Hello!" "Dulce!" Nia cheered, bounding across the room while Tio followed and Zio kept a safe distance behind. With a warm smile and sticky sweet personality, Diosa Pan Dulce was one of Tio's favorite people. She was short with soft curves and wore her hair in braided spirals on either side of her head like Novia's sweetbread. Her counterpart, Dios Mays, was less excited to see them. "So help me," he groaned, coming to an abrupt stop. For the god of the harvest, the tall and lanky Dios didn't look like he ate much. He had a long face, a wide nose, earth-rich black skin, and eyes the color of tobacco leaves that were currently glaring at Tio and Nia. Mays and Dulce were both jades, and as such weren't as revered as the greater gold gods, but everyone acknowledged they were the backbone of any event. They were the best chefs in all of Seoul and very dedicated to their art, though Mays took it a bit more seriously than Dulce. "I like the new haircut," Tio said. Before the incident, Mays had shiny cornrows that fell to the middle of his back. Now his hair was styled into glossy 360 waves. Mays glowered at him, the edge of his right eyebrow still missing. "What do you want?" "We'll get to that," Tio said, brushing aside the question. "First, how are you?" "Very busy," Mays huffed. "Do you need something?" Dulce asked, tying an apron around her waist. "We were hoping for a late-night snack," Nia said, sitting on one of the stools and swiveling back and forth. "Do you think you can make us some hot chocolate?" "And pan, if you've got any," Tio added. "Please," they both said in unison, flashing matching smiles. Dulce beamed and moved to go back into the kitchen. "Of course!" "No!" May snapped, stopping her in her tracks. Tio dramatically flopped over the counter. "But we need sugar!" Dulce looked to Mays, but he wasn't falling for it. "If you want to be Sunbearer, you need protein and vegetables," he said. But the joke was on Mays. Tio had no desire to win the trials, just to get through them as quickly as possible. "But Dio Mays," Nia whined. From the corner of her eye, Tio caught Zio grinning. "No, I'm done cooking for tonight," Mays huffed, wiping his hands on a dish towel before stomping across the room. "If you need a snack, there's plenty of fruit on the table. Shouldn't be filling yourselves up anyway. It's bad to sleep on a full stomach." At the door, he stopped and turned. "Good night." And with that, Dio Mays was gone. "I'm sorry, you three," Dulce said with an apologetic smile. "He's had a very long day, and he does have your best interests at heart." Nia slumped, her bottom lip jutting out in a pout. "We know." Tio propped his chin in his hand. "The Quetzal priest always made me hot chocolate when I couldn't sleep. We're just feeling a bit homesick, is all." He lifted his shoulder in a shrug and sighed theatrically. Dulce's eyebrows tipped with concern as she clasped her hands. "Aren't we?" He turned to give Nia and Zio a pointed look. "Oh yes, very homesick," Nia agreed, bobbing her head enthusiastically. It took Zio a moment to catch on, but then he nodded too. The poor Diosa looked between the three of them, stricken. Her face went on a journey, mouth twisting as she anxiously looked to where Mays had left. Okay, but just a small little treat," she whispered after hurrying to the kitchen. "Mays is a stickler," Nia told Zio. "Also, we kind of fucked up his hair and he's still not over it. Long story." "Dulce is way softer," Tio agreed. He barely finished his sentence before Dulce burst back into the room, holding a huge tray with 3 steaming clay cups of hot chocolate, topped with whipped cream and candlesticks, and a small mountain of baked goods in all shapes and sizes. Zio's eyes bulged as Dulce set the tray down on the island. "Whoa!" "Thank you, Dulce," Nia sang, pulling the goddess into a tight hug. "Oh!" she giggled, a blush blooming on her apple cheeks. "You're the best," Tio agreed, immediately taking a cup and a pig-shaped Purquito, I think. "Don't let Mays catch you," she said, brushing off her apron after Nia released her. "And if he does, you didn't get it from me." "We won't tell a soul," Nia promised with a full mouth, already halfway through an oreja. "Thanks," Zio said meekly with a shy smile, his hands cupping a hot chocolate. Pan Dulce beamed and handed them all napkins before retiring for the night. They took their hot chocolate and pan to the common area. Tia put the tray on a coffee table, and they sprawled out on some of the plush armchairs. The hot chocolate was amazing, frothy, velvety smooth, with just the right amount of spice. The pan was perfect, as only Dulce could make it, but Zio had to type out after his second concha. "I'm in a food coma," Zio groaned, putting crumbs in the corner of his mouth. "Someone's gonna have to roll me to the first trial," Tio agreed. "You're both weak," Nia said, taking another large bite of bigote before washing it down with a swig of hot chocolate. She swallowed, thumped her fist against her chest, and released a belch so loud Zio jumped. The 3 of them dissolved into laughter. Tio was in that funny stage of being too wired to be tired, crackling at the edges from the influx of sugar. Suddenly, voices approached from down the hall. "Wait! Shh!" Tio hissed. "Someone's coming!" He quickly shoved the nearly empty tray under the table while Zio and Nia sank low in their chairs. The murmuring grew louder until Tio could finally make out who it was. They shouldn't be here, Aurelio said, his voice low and gruff. It's not right. They're jades. The words hit Tio like a punch to the chest. At least we don't have to worry about one of our own losing, came Aristelia's voice, loud and clear as they passed by the door. It'd suck if the sacrifice was one of us. Nia moved to get up, but Tio threw out his hand and shook his head. Judging by the determined glow on her face, he thought Nia was going to ignore him and stomp into the hall after them anyway. But then she gritted her teeth and sank back down, fingers digging into the arms of her chair. Yeah, it'll be easy for us to keep them at the bottom. That time it was a cello. We can just focus on winning. Across from him, Zio's chin dipped to his chest. That's not... Aurelio started, but Tio had heard enough. Don't listen to them, Zio, he said, speaking over the voices as they receded down the hall. Zio nodded but didn't look up, toying with his father's bracelet. Tio's jaw clenched. Just when they'd gotten Zio to break out of his shell, the golds had to come along and fuck it up. You should have let me go after them, Nia growled. Let them know they got to us? No way, Tio said, crossing his arms trying to ignore the flush spreading up the back of his neck. We can get them back later, I promise you that, he added to Zio. Nia seemed satisfied with that answer, though Zio didn't look quite as sure. It's totally fucked, Tio said. On TV, they're always portrayed as their selfless heroes protecting all of us lowly civilians, but it's all for show, isn't it? Tio said, seething. No offense, Nia. It's true for them, Nia agreed. I don't bother getting to know the others, but Aristella and Estella are cutthroat as hell. And Aurelio? She laughed and shook her head. The guy just sits there in class like a robot, like he's been programmed. Sorry, she added, seeing Tio's face. I know you were friends. You're friends with Aurelio? Zio asked, finally speaking. Were, Tio emphasized, sitting up straighter. That was a long time ago. Zio's brow puckered. What happened? Tio finally really didn't feel like rehashing ancient history. He'd been giving Nia the broad strokes and she didn't push for more. But if conversating made Zio feel better. We were friends when we were super little, Tio said, ripping a concha into tiny pieces as he spoke. Aurelio and Aristella were mostly raised by their mortal dad. I've never met him, but everyone says he's really nice. Totally different from Diosa Lumbre. I mean, you've seen her. She's not entirely the nurturing type, he pointed out. Zio and Nia nodded in agreement. I was really outgoing and Aurelio was super shy, Tio explained. First time I ever saw Aurelio, he looked so small in a group of black-robed priests. Estella and Aristella were glued at the hip, but Aurelio was always attached to a priest, warily looking around like he was on the verge of tears. When I first saw him at some random ceremony, he looked like he was a friend. Tio thought Aurelio was lonely, which is a sentiment he could relate to, so, with determination, he decided the two of them should be less lonely, together. Aurelio broke out of his shell a bit, and during every ceremony that brought all the Diosis and Semidiosis together at Cell Temple, they were inseparable. Aurelio and Tio were looked after by Quetzal most of the time, playing tag and hide-and-seek around our large wings. Even when we got older, he didn't talk much, except when the academy was brought up, Tio said. The elite training for golds was run by Diosa Lumbre in her home city, San Fuego. When she wasn't ruling with the other gods from Soul Temple, she was there instructing. Aurelio always talked about starting at the academy, how he'd become a proper hero and finally be able to spend time with his mom. For a long time, Tio had assumed he would go to the academy too. He and Aurelio would run around the temple, pretending to fight off monsters and rescue civilians. Tio even made homemade trading cards for him and Aurelio. And his mom told him that only golds went to the academy, not jades. Aurelio started at the academy the year after this last Sunbearer trials. Tio had been heartbroken, but Aurelio promised that he'd tell Tio everything about it. New Year's was the first time they saw each other after that. Tio spotted Aurelio across the room, sitting with Aristella and Acello. He ran out to Aurelio, wanting to hear all about the academy. Instead of a warm reunion like they had every year, Aurelio was cold and unresponsive. Tio tried to ask him questions, but Aurelio only gave short answers and wouldn't even look at him. He kept his eyes on the floor as Diosa Lumbre stood by, watching. What's wrong? Tio tried to ask. Stop bugging him, Aristella cut in, tugging at her brother's arms. Golds only hang out with other golds, Acello scoffed. Yeah, no jades, Aristella agreed. Tio tried to catch Aurelio's eye, but the other boy turned away. He remembered how humiliating it had felt, how his heart thudded dully in his chest as Acello and Aristella laughed and Aurelio refused to acknowledge him. He might find him some time later, hiding under the stone statue in the courtyard and crying. But he left that part out of the story. He started class at the academy, and I hadn't had a real conversation with him since, Tio finished, doing his best to ignore the burning in the back of his throat. And then you upgraded to me, Nia said, beaming. Tio exhaled in a relieved laugh. I sure did. They call Aristella, Aurelio, and Acello the Golden Trio because they're the top-ranked students in the academy, but they're just a bunch of assholes. All they care about is becoming Sunbearer, and only one of them can win. They'll probably start eating one another alive during the trials. You'll see. They'll get what's coming to them, Nia said with a pleased smile. I hope you're right. I used to get teased by these girls at school a lot, Zio said suddenly in a small voice. Seriously? Tio asked. Who had the balls to pick on a child of mala suerte? I used to have really long hair, and they'd always come up to me and say how much they liked the curls and how pretty they were. Tio's expression soured as he said the word. Irritation simmered under Tio's skin. He understood all too well. Even after I came out as trans and cut it short, they kept touching it and calling my hair pretty. I hated it. Zio frowned, absently tugging at a lock of his hair. Then one day, all three of them got lice, like really bad to the point they had to shave their heads. Oh my Dios, Neo said, fist pressed to her mouth, barely able to hold in a laugh. Zio's shoulders lifted in a small shrug. Bad luck, I guess. That's what they get, Tio agreed with a huff. I like your hair a lot, he added. I see guys on social media putting perms to get theirs to look like yours, and it's nowhere near as cool. Very handsome, Nia agreed with an enthusiastic nod. For the first time that night, Zio smiled. Tio grinned back. It was nice to meet someone who had been through the same kind of bullshit as him. Nia was his best friend, but as a cisgender girl and a gold, there's a lot about his life and experiences she just wouldn't get. But Zio could. Tio sat upright. You know what? We should team up. Team up? Nia repeated, sweeping her finger on the inside of her mug to get the last drops of melted chocolate. Yeah, I mean, if those three have it out for us, why don't we work together to tear them down? We could be the Dre Trio. Or, well, Nia's a goal, but you get the idea. Nia's eyes lit up. We can be the kick-ass trio, because we're gonna kick their asses. Ooh, we're the great-ass trio, because we got great asses. At least I do. Zio, how's your butt? She asked, peeking over at him. Toned? We can start a squat regimen. Zio hesitated, his hand frozen mid-reach for another pastry. I don't give a shit about becoming Sunbearer, Tio said. Just want to get through the trials in one piece. We're stronger if we work together, right? He turned to Zio. With everything you know about the Golds, we can definitely outsmart them. We don't have to do this alone. We can show them they're wrong. He could watch out for Zio. This didn't have to be a death sentence. I don't know, Zio said meekly, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't want to drag you guys down. You won't, Tio insisted. I always hated those fools anyway, so obsessed with her hierarchies and pedigree, Nia said, rolling her eyes. You know gold is like the most useless metal, right? She flicked her wrist and one of her gold bangles leapt into her hand. It's way too soft, good for nothing but looking pretty. She closed her fist, turning the gold lump into mangled bits. Jade was actually way more valuable back in the day. Tio grinned, adrenaline coursing through his veins. We can look out for one another and make sure none of us becomes a sacrifice. That'll really show them. Already he was drunk on the idea of seeing Aurelio's, Aristella's, and Ocello's faces at the idea of a gold coming in last. What do you say? I am so in, Nia agreed, leaning forward to rub her hands together. For a long moment, Zio chewed on the inside of his cheek, but then he finally nodded, his curls bouncing against his forehead. Okay. A sudden lightness made Tio feel giddy. Then it's us against them. Now, being in the trials didn't feel like a death sentence. Now they had the chance to really prove something. Not just to the Golds, but to everyone.